Good morning, and welcome to NeoConnect 2020. NeoConnect is NeoCon's online series of resources, programming, and events held throughout the month of June. I'm Monica DeBartolo, NeoCon's Director of Programming, and I want to thank you for joining us. Today's session is approved for 1 CEU credit for interior designers and 1 LU HSW credit for architects. It is also being recorded so you can access it on demand. Please refer to your screen for more details. Today's session is titled, From Ocean to Office, A New Path for Plastic. Keeping plastics in the economy and out of our oceans is easier said than done. In this session, our experts will explore how design can provide a solution that allows conscientious designers to specify products that directly help reduce ocean plastic. Today's presenters include 3 industry specialists. As Chief Sustainability Officer, Jane Abernathy develops the strategic vision for sustainability at human scale in New York. She has taken the ambitious goal of having net positive impact. Jane works to implement this vision by guiding the R&D effort to create the most sustainable products possible and by working with manufacturing facilities to instill sustainability as a fundamental way of operating. Under her leadership, HumanScale has been recognized as the first manufacturer to achieve the entire Living Product Challenge and is founding member of the Net Positive Project. Mikhail Davis, located in San Francisco, is the Director of Technical Sustainability at Interface, a world-leading modular flooring company. An expert in sustainable materials and NGO collaborations, Mikhail represents Interface in many organizations focused on sustainability innovation, closed-loop systems, recycling, and chemicals of concern. He served as chair of the U.S. Green Buildings Council's Technical Advisory Group on Materials and Resources from 2016 to 2019. Kendall Starkman leads the implementation of Lonely Whales initiatives with corporate partners with a focus on Next Wave Plastics. Next Wave Plastics is a consortium of global companies committed to keeping plastic in the economy and out of our oceans by integrating ocean-bound plastic into products. Kendall convenes existing members, propels ongoing collaboration, strengthens the network of ocean-bound plastic suppliers, and supports member use case management to drive forward innovation and near-term impact for our oceans. I am pleased to turn the program over to Kendall Starkman.
Thank you, Monica, and thanks for those wonderful introductions. We're really excited to be here today to talk to you guys about ocean-bound plastic and what HumanScale Interface and a number of other Next Wave Plastics member companies are doing to turn off the tap on ocean-bound plastic. So just as a quick note, please do, as Monica mentioned, input your questions into the Q&A button that's down at the bottom of your screen rather than typing it into the chat. That's where we'll be able to find it and come back to it once the 3 of us have had a chance to share our presentations with you. And we'll have that fuel our discussion a little bit later on in today's presentation. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen and giving a little bit of background, apologies, to the issue that we're talking about here today with regard to marine plastic pollution and ocean-bound plastic in general. And then how that brings together this conversation as well as Interface and HumanScale. So the issue of plastic is one that has been in the forefront of our conversation more broadly as a society recently, and it's really because of the conditions that we're faced. So to give you some context for what the world of plastic looks like right now, there is over 300 million tons of plastic that are produced every year globally, and that applies to everything from the computer that you're calling in using today to the packaging that we see everywhere in grocery stores to our carpets and office furniture and cars and things like that. And this scale of plastic is even hard to understand and conceive of, but it's everywhere in our lives. There's lots of benefits to having plastic, but there's also lots of challenges that are presented. But one thing that is really clear is that the use of plastic and the projected production of plastic is not going down. It's actually projected to increase exponentially. And the use of plastic and even the use of plastic really recently with COVID has been really apparent with you know, the PPE, but also the fact that we don't have as much of the ability to make decisions in terms of whether we use our reusables in our grocery stores. And so what this looks like given the post-COVID world will also be interesting to consider. This at the forefront of things, the production of plastic isn't necessarily the problem. The problem is more that less than 10% of those 300 million tons of plastic, it's over that, is recycled. And in places in developed countries where we have appropriate waste management facilities, a lot of that is able to be taken care of through going to landfill and some level of recycling. But in many of places in the world, the capacity to handle this much plastic waste is very limited. And so we have this material that never goes away, and our capacity to actually reclaim it and reuse it is exceptionally limited. What happens as a natural factor of this is that there's quite a bit of leakage that happens into the environment. And oftentimes it looks like this. It's very distributed. You know, you think of this place as this serene, gorgeous beach, somewhere that you'd want to go daydreaming on vacation. But there's quite a bit of plastic in the water. But even this, you know, would be hard to collect. Maybe you could affect this, but the fact that it's distributed across the ocean at this huge, large scale is pretty significant and hard to really wrap your hands around. But the facts around this and the science that's been done shows that this is the result of about 8 to 10 million metric tons of plastic entering our ocean every year. And that equates to about a garbage truck of plastic being dumped in the ocean every minute. And this has led to the situation where nearly 80% of marine litter is plastic. And this means that it's plastic that is out in marine environments. It's becoming degraded, breaking down into smaller pieces, meaning it's harder to actually reclaim. And it's providing a threat to marine ecosystems that are just not able to deal with it. And so but we also don't have the ability to reclaim it. And this results in things that we've seen. It has impacts across our ocean to like the farthest edges and the deepest depths of the ocean, to seabirds on Midway Island trying to feed their chicks bottle caps that are colorful and look like food. But it also affects people. And it is also about us. And in places where there is limited ability to actually manage their waste, this becomes a huge public health issue, because communities that are dependent on their ecological systems are no longer really able to maintain the health of their communities. And you know, in the age of COVID, where I assume you'd think that there's probably a lot more PPE littering beaches that look like this. This continues to be a huge problem. So in the face of this problem, a number of companies, and as I'm sure you're aware as an attendee at this session, have really seen this as an opportunity. How do we actually stop the plastic from getting to the ocean in the first place, where it's basically impossible for us to collect it, process it, and use it again? And so, back in 2016, Dell Technologies and Lonely Well, my company, got together to think about how do we actually start to turn off the tap on plastic pollution? How do we establish those plastics that are headed towards the ocean or highly vulnerable to ending up in the ocean, which we call ocean-bound plastics, establish them as a commodity to actually decrease the volume of plastic that's ending up in the ocean, and then in effect keeping it in the economy and out of our environment. And we did that by creating the consortium Next Wave Plastics, which is a consortium of companies that are large global brands that are listed here, which many of which you'd recognize, that have come together in a collaborative and open source context to be able to share their learnings through their commitment to turn off the tap on plastic pollution by using recycled ocean-bound plastic in their products and packaging. The Next Wave Plastic members have made a commitment to collectively remove a minimum of 25,000 metric tons of ocean-bound plastic by the end of 2025, which equates to about 1 billion single-use plastic water bottles. This is in alignment with SDG 14.1. And what's really key here is that this family of brands, which includes the team at Interface and HumanScale that are speaking here today, aren't typically the ones that you'd associate with the plastic that ends up in the ocean. They're not putting out single-use plastic packaging that oftentimes is highly at risk, but there is the opportunity for them to think about the materials that are out there and that are vulnerable to entering the ocean and think about how that fits into their supply chains and the products that they're creating and putting out into the market, and reinventing kind of how they think about how they design and create what they're building. So this looks like a variety of different things. Across all of those companies, you saw that there's this huge range of industries. It's not just the interior design industry with carpets and furniture. It's also bicycles at Trek, who's making components for it. It's ink cartridges at HP, as well as their technology. It's things like the lining in backpacks and suitcases, as well as packaging with Dell and like shipping crates that ship the stuff internally from place to place within companies. So this looks like a variety of different things, and really is dependent on this collaboration and knowledge sharing that when you're talking about ocean-bound plastic, you can share, you can learn from what HumanScale is doing, reclaiming nets in working with Borreo on. Jane will tell you the whole story, but what HumanScale is doing and how that translates to how Trek can create a water bottle holder for their bikes out of that same material. And this collaboration has really resulted in a global network of ocean-bound plastic suppliers, either ones that we've worked with hand in hand to get their supply up and running, or ones that were pre-existing and are trusted partners in our network. But this issue spans the globe. The plight of our oceans spans the globe, and so we're really rising to the challenge in a collaborative fashion across competitors and industry partners to be able to actually bring these people together and share information. So I will let Jane and Mikhail tell you the specific stories of Interface and HumanScale and the work they're doing with ocean-bound plastic, and I look forward to speaking more during the Q&A. Mikhail's going to kick us off with Interface's story as they're key leaders in this space. One of the first at Interface was one of the first to really dive into this. So Mikhail, tell us all about it, please.
Thank you, Kendall. Good morning, everyone. It is interesting, this story of this innovation project and collaboration really plays out across a number of NeoCons. This was the first year that we launched the products that had some of this material in it. Was the first year I went to NeoCon, which was about 7 days after I joined Interface. It was a great, trial by fire. Here's commercial interiors. Welcome to NeoCon. So funny to think about NeoCon in the context of social distancing, since it is the exact opposite of social distancing. But glad to be with you, at least in some way, if not in person. So this is really, I'm going to tell you the story of how we got involved in ocean plastics, which was not our intention when we got involved in it. And I'll give you a couple ideas of how we got into it. But keeping plastics out of the ocean, that, you know, obviously is a great thing, but that was not really our port of entry. We didn't start out with a concern for the ocean. We were really just looking for ways to source more sustainable materials. The other piece that goes along with that, because we've had this long-standing mission to move all of our materials that we make our flooring products out of into coming from sustainable sources where we can really scale them without doing harm to the environment. So the next thing we really looked at, and we were trying to decrease, is how could we have a positive social impact while we are decreasing our environmental impact? So we actually had some, you know, as we were working on changing our supply chain, we had these great partners like Aquafil, who were really working on getting recycled content into the yarns we were buying for our carpet tile. We also were really interested in how do we create a social story? How do we create a positive social impact? So we started looking into this. Now, the woman who really deserves the most credit for the Networks program, Mariam Turner, who I'll introduce to you in a video, she put it this way, which I thought was really great, because we have lots of green certifications for materials, we have recycled content, but this is the way she phrased it. If carpet were coffee, wouldn't you prefer fair trade? So there's no equivalent in materials to, if you buy fair trade coffee, we know that the grower of the coffee actually got a sustainable living wage type benefit from growing that coffee. It didn't all just go to middlemen. We've actually set up the supply chain in such a way that we ensure that the communities that need the money most actually receive the money. But there's no model for that in procuring materials to build, for instance, building products out of. So this was actually Miriam's first attempt at this. This is, you know, well over 10 years ago. They attempted to do a program we called Fairworks. We worked with artisans in India to create these amazing kind of grass woven mats that you could kind of embed into modular flooring. And as this quote from Nigel, who's the head of our European and Asian business, says, it ticked all the boxes on social and environmental value, made from renewable materials and working with these amazing artisans in India, providing social benefit directly and economic benefit directly to these communities. And yet we couldn't figure out how to sell it. It was too different than our product. And so it never scaled. The benefit never scaled because it was too different. But it really was something we learned from. Miriam headed up that project. And so she started looking at what would work. Okay, that we figured out what didn't work about that. And this is her story.
The livelihoods of the people in this part of the Philippines is completely dependent upon the sea, one way or another. Danahan Bank is now one of the most degraded coral reefs in the world, with some of the highest fishing pressure. Fishers use, especially in the Philippines, use a lot of monofilament nylon nets. When discarded nets go into the marine environment and they just hang around, they can last for 600 plus years.
This is a really high performance engineering plastic. You know, nylon 6 is in our carpet. It's also in lots of other products that people will use every day. So we want to make sure that material can be used again. Networks is a program that takes discarded fishing nets from impoverished communities and recycles them into carpet tile.
The idea is to collect discarded fishing nets off the beaches or get them from fishers as soon as they have finished using them.
What's really important about this program is that it's not a one-shot beach cleanup for some nice pictures. It's actually about how do you institutionalize nets and ultimately other material recycling in communities in a way that benefits them in the long term.
Someday moabot ra gid ang panahon nga mahurot ang tanang pupot diri sa kayonan. Kay daghan naman nga mosundog namo.
Mga sample nga gihatag nga gipatan-aw namo dire. Ako nakita nga dako day kay mahimo ang maong pupot.
The product is still our product, beautiful carpet tile. It will look the same, but there'll be this story behind the material. This to me is the start of us being a restorative enterprise. We're giving back and giving opportunities that are way beyond what maybe people would think a carpet tile company could do. And this is only the beginning.
So some of you, if you followed Interface, have probably seen that video. That is the video that launched the program back in 2013. And so we have come a long way since then and really refined the model. The other story I want to tell you is how Networks really got started. You saw Dr. Nick Hill and you saw Mariam, and that they really are the founders of Networks. And it really started over a beer in a pub in London as things really, you know, as what really happens in real life. That's how the work gets done, as we know at NeoCon. The conversation went something like this. Nick and Mariam had gone to undergrad together, studied environmental science at the University of Edinburgh. And this is 10 years on, and Nick says to Mariam, wow, I really thought when we were in school together, we'd figure out some Save the World project to work on. I guess, you know, maybe it's not really gonna happen this time around. You know, I'm going back to the Philippines to do my fisheries research, and I mean, you work for a carpet company, and maybe it's just not gonna happen. And Mariam says to him, well, wait a minute, what kind of plastic are the nets they use in those communities made out of? Because we had just learned from Aquafil, who's of course the other third and very important partner, that they were sourcing fishing nets from big ports in Europe because it's the same kind of plastic, nylon 6, that we make carpet yarn out of. And so that really became the birth of a pilot study within 5 villages in the Philippines that Nick and ZSL, the Zoological Society of London, were already working in, really trying to help preserve this incredibly degraded fishery. But it's a double barrier coral reef. It's one of only a few in the world. It's this potentially amazing biodiversity hotspot, and yet due to the lack of waste management, and then there's no wastewater management, and there's relatively high population pressure on all these tiny islands in this fairly, you know, remote, you know, non-urban area of the central Philippines. They just had nothing to do with all these nets, and every time the net goes in the water, it makes your fishery, your whole basis of your life, you know, worse. It, you know, degrades the coral reef, catches fish that no one's ever going to pull up. So really the change that we made, once we were successful, we shipped back bales from these initial pilots to Aquafil and said, could you use this material? Can you make, you know, fiber out of this? And they said, yeah, in fact, this fiber is so clean because the fishermen pick all of the ropes and weights and all the other stuff out of it because they're going to reuse those, that we'll pay you extra for this material. And so that is really how we start to connect this, because once Aquafil has put a price on this, we can then pay this back into the communities and say, this is the price we can pay you per kilo of nets you bring to us. And this, again, is how waste becomes wealth. We set it up so that it makes no sense economically to leave nets on the beach. And the wonderful thing, because the horror stories you always heard, is when fishing was really bad in these communities, someone would go and drop dynamite on the reef. Because that would actually, something's going to float up that you can eat or sell. Now it's going to damage the reef that much more for years to come and ensure that the fishing is worse, but we got to eat today. So the story here now is when fishing is not great, they go and get nets out of deeper water. So now all the shallow water around the islands has no nets in it either, because that's what you do when you're really desperate, is you go get more nets to turn in and sell. And so when things are bad, the environment actually gets better. So this is how business does social good if we set it up right. This is the process of redesigning business to do good, rather than accidentally harming the environment or vulnerable communities. So the other thing that we provided here is we really, for the first time, were able to hook these communities into the global economy, into a global supply chain, thanks to Aquafil, who can take these nets and turn them into a valuable commodity. You know, this is something these communities never had access to, and something that was absolutely transformational. The third thing, and this became super important, and we tried several models for this, is to set it up so that the community controls the economics. They actually have a community banking infrastructure where people can save money for the first time. There's almost no financial services on these islands in the central Philippines, especially the more remote ones. But they also then, as a community, control who can get loans out of the bank. So it's a community-controlled microfinance project. And the wonderful thing you've seen, people have taken out loans to make sure their kids can go to school. The other thing that's really exciting is they've started to diversify the local economy so they're not so dependent on fishing. One of the success stories recently has been the number of seaweed farms, which of course are really highly compatible with fishing because they become fish nurseries. But of course, seaweed is used for carrageenan and other commodities all over the world. So again, you have access to another global market that we're starting to open up as part of networks for this very, aligned companion industry that helps the local fishery. The other thing that's been a really interesting thing to see, this is what ZSL was trying initially to do with their programs, to educate people, but then suddenly their programs have a way for people to make money. And suddenly ZSL's programs to conserve the biological richness of this area become much more effective. In fact, so effective that now the community banks have, by their own initiative, are putting aside 1% of all the money in the bank to restore the mangroves, which are these fish nurseries, these tidal forests, that of course are key to the health. And if these get gummed up with fishing nets, it's really bad for the fishery, because then all the baby fish are in trouble and they never become adult fish. So overall, this is some of the stats on networks and what we've accomplished. Is still relatively small. It's in about 41 villages. Now has expanded beyond the central Philippines into Cameroon and West Africa and into Indonesia in the first site. Got over 2,000 families have access to finance through community banking. Nearly 260 metric tons of fishing nets have been collected. And this is perhaps the most exciting thing. I'm moving back to Kendall's point, is that we've seen other brands get into this game of figuring out how to make what they make out of this really damaging fishing net waste, which of course, if it remains in the water, lasts virtually forever and continues to catch stuff. Everything from whales and dolphins and sea turtles, obviously, to fish that no one's ever going to eat. This was something I discovered recently that was fun to see as a sign of spread. I saw a story, which I've never seen video of our Cameroon sites, because most of our videos are about the sites in the central Philippines. But this is actually a video sponsored by Prada, for their Renylon project for their handbags. They of course also work with Aquafil, but they're touting some of their material is now coming from these same network sites in the Lake Osa region of Cameroon and West Africa, and cataloging the amazing social benefit happening there. So, first response, oh, that's our project. We started this, but everyone's heard of Prada. If Prada wants to promote this idea of keeping, nets out of the ocean and putting it into commerce, more power to them. Now we just have to get them to join Next Wave. But this is what Next Wave and what this is all about, is creating this wave of brands and businesses starting to keep this material in use, whether it be a handbag or carpet, or we're going to learn now about how we're getting into furniture. This is the point. This is really what it's about creating these options to create this wonderful social and ecological benefit story to the products we want to buy every day anyway. So one of the fun things we discovered a few years ago at an event at NeoCon, when we invited the founders of Borreo, who's Jane's supplier, is that they were actually influenced by networks to start their program. So again, this wave continues, and I'll let Jane tell you a bit about their story.
Thank you. So this is Jane Abernethy, and I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer from Human Scale. Give me just a second to share my screen. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Human Scale, we are a global leader in products that enhance health and wellness at work. We produce ergonomic tools that like monitor arms, keyboard platforms, lighting and task lighting and seating, that encourage movement and allow people to adjust to the workplace allow people to adjust the workplace to them instead of having to adjust to the workplace. So as a manufacturer, we know that we have an impact on the environment. A few years ago, we decided to take a step back and take a deeper look into what it means to manufacture sustainably. And we realized that reducing the amount of negative impact we have wasn't going to leave us with the world that we wanted. So for example, we can reduce our waste by 50%, which would be, a difficult thing to undertake. It would be a good thing to do. It is less bad, but it still does leave us producing a certain amount of waste. So ideally what we aim to do is reduce our waste by 100% or as close to that as we can get, and then continue to help others reduce their waste until we're actually passing that threshold, going beyond doing less bad into the point where we're starting to do have a net positive or do more good than harm impact in the world. And at that point, that's when we're actually a force that's starting to clean up, regenerate, and be part of the solution to some of our environmental problems. So we have been looking for a while, and we have a number of different initiatives. I think I would agree with Mikhail that this is, one of many research projects and initiatives that we have around the idea of trying to use less waste. And so when we are evaluating our net positive impact, the using less waste would fall into resource depletion and wildlife preservation. We of course evaluate across a number of different categories. So resource depletion, for ocean plastic would be a key one. We know that every time we manufacture, or the vast majority of products that are manufactured, the raw material is usually being extracted from nature. So as we have a number of projects to look for other sources of raw material, this would be the example of, first of all, extracting less from nature, but then also preventing the damage to nature and preserving wildlife in that way as well. So in 2016, we started to collaborate with Borreo. It is interesting to hear all the backstories. So we had met up with Borreo partly because both of us were pursuing the Living Product Challenge, but interesting to hear that they were partially inspired by Interface, who was inspired by Aquafil, and to hear how that goes, how the more that we are able to take this on and achieve this and then spread the message that this is possible, the more that other companies can see it's feasible and be able to try and take that on in their area as well. So that is a good portion of what Next Wave is doing, is promoting this so that it becomes a reality and is supported in what it's currently doing, but really grows and expands and becomes a larger program. So 2016, we started to partner with a company called Borreo, who works on the ground with the local fishing communities to have their communities gather back the nets, fishing nets, which, as Mikhail had mentioned, are some of the worst kind of ocean plastic, as they do continue to float in the ocean and catch fish for hundreds of years after they're released. They also make up a significant amount of ocean plastic. So I've heard estimates of around 20% of ocean plastic is discarded fishing gear. So those nets are then cleaned up, sold to Borreo, who turns them into pellets. We make them into chair parts, assemble them into chairs, and then sell the chairs made up with the ocean plastic material. This is an example of our aim to have that net positive impact built into a product. And so the wonderful thing is that if a person were to purchase a smart chair because they think it's beautiful or comfortable and it's a good quality product, those are all the great reasons to buy products. The byproducts, the sort of unintended consequences in this case will be that the oceans will be cleaned up more, there'll be less fish and marine life that are captured and needlessly killed, and that there are local businesses in Chile that are viable and being supported for the local communities that are gathering back these nets. So that's sort of that net positive in practice. I'm going to talk through a little bit about what it took to get the material into the product, starting with the local communities. So it's worth noting that the local communities who are fishing communities, when they have holes in their nets or their nets are no longer usable, they would discard them into the ocean. And this is not them being malicious, irresponsible, lazy, or anything like that. From my understanding, traditionally their nets were made of hemp. they would discard the hemp nets into the ocean, which would biodegrade relatively quickly, and be part of that ecosystem. Being plant-based, they would be part of that ecosystem, and it wouldn't be a problem. A few decades ago, they started to use nylon nets, which are more durable, which is great for a certain period of time and terrible afterwards. The nylon nets, of course, when they discard them, they stay in the ocean for a long period of time, for hundreds of years. A lot of these communities are very remote and don't have the infrastructure. Like literally, they just don't have the infrastructure to recycle these nets. If they try to haul them back and trying to bring them to a place where they could landfill them, they're often facing very steep landfill fees, and it's cost prohibitive for them to do that. So they were not necessarily happy to see them in their communities either, but they just literally didn't have other opportunities or other means to deal with them. So Borreo started working very closely with local fishing communities, beginning with Coquimbo in Chile, and it has really been important to them and to us as well to partner with the local communities to understand and make sure that it is having a positive impact on the communities. A portion of the proceeds does go to local impact projects, including like a solar power system on a school and a number of other projects that are underway, driven by the local communities. As we scale up and as Borreo scales up with their collection base, that has always been really important to them, to scale up in partnership with the local communities and not to have an infrastructure that is being laid on over top of them. So our next challenge from a sort of making this happen point of view is not the most exciting to talk about, but it is really the bulk of the work was to making some of this happen, with all the logistics and renegotiations and reframing that we needed to do. So on the one hand, we have material that is being collected in certain parts of the world. Manufacturing happens in other parts of the world. We had to ship between different countries, and the material had been deemed waste, and we had a really hard time moving it from place to place because of the way it was viewed. So this is really a perception issue. It's going to be the input to our new products. So it is a raw material for us, but once it's deemed waste, many countries have really strict rules around importing waste into their countries. So there were some interesting challenges and have conversations trying to get customs agents and folks to reevaluate what they have, to look at it not as waste, but as a raw material and a resource. That I feel like is a theme that happened across the board in many conversations, is getting people to look at the material not as waste, but as a resource, and think of it completely differently. The other thing that was an interesting challenge was it meant renegotiating through our supply chain in a really in a deeper way, where normally our suppliers are given a certain amount of freedom to choose their vendors where they would buy nylon from. We really tied them to this specific collection program and this specific vendor. So there were a number of things that need to be renegotiated to make sure that all of that went smoothly, and so we had to be a lot more hands-on in every single step along the way of the supply chain. Once we had the material flowing, we did find that we had to work, had a fair engineering challenge on our hands, because we were not launching a new product. We, for our first test to see if we could make this happen, we decided to keep it in some ways simple, to implement it into an existing product that already uses nylon. That product is a smart chair. It's already on the market for a number of years, which means there is a precedent set. It means that there are quality standards that are already being met. It means there are existing molds and existing components that are already designed. So, some of the design freedoms you could have when you're dealing with a new design, like if you want to make your component a little bit stiffer or stronger, you could add materials to the sides, make the walls thicker of a component. If you wanted to have it flow through the mold more quickly, you could add radii. There are different things you can do in the design. Here we couldn't actually change the design of the product, but what we ended up doing is working through some drying techniques. So the material had absorbed a lot of water when it was in the ocean. We had to dry it with different techniques, and then different processing techniques to have it meet that same criteria and stand up to the 15-year warranty that our current smart chair does meet. And then after that was about 2 years of work or so from the initial conversation of us talking with Borreo saying, is this, yes, we want a partner, yes, we're going to try and make this happen, to go through all of the negotiations, the quality evaluations and the engineering work to make sure that we actually had a product that we could launch. And so that took around 2 years worth of work, which might be surprising. You know, it surprised us the amount of work that went into it, considering that we were taking a product that existed, already made of nylon, and you know, replacing it with nylon as the same material. But there was enough complexity in doing that on the back end that it did take a couple of years. And it's been interesting trying to scale this and then include it into other components in other products. It does. I am finding that we've learned a lot in scaling it up. It also requires a certain amount of looking at things differently, convincing a number of different suppliers, a number of different people to look at the material differently and reevaluate their businesses accordingly. So all of that work goes into this small logo of a fish that you'd see beside the human scale logo on the Smart Ocean. All that work is kind of summarized in that small logo. I also have a short video to share, which I think is kind of interesting to see a few images of the local communities and the folks from Borreo who are partners with us. So I will share that as well.
How is a chair preventing ocean plastic pollution? To answer that question, we start here, along the coast of Chile. Plastic is accumulating in our oceans at an alarming rate, and leading ocean scientists are predicting more plastic than fish will inhabit our oceans by 2050. The impacts of which are strangling a fragile underwater ecosystem. Yet more than 1 billion people rely on fish as their main source of protein, and the fishing industry provides income for millions of families. Fishermen rely on nets made from plastic to meet this need. That's why Human Scale teamed up with Borreo. Borreo is working directly with fishermen across the coast of Chile to create a positive solution through the collection and recycling of fishing nets at the end of their life. So these once burdensome materials can be transformed into new, responsible products. Supporting the continued growth of Borreo's recycling program, Human Scale is utilizing Net Plus materials to change the way products are made. Introducing the Smart Ocean Chair, incorporating almost 2 pounds of discarded fishing nets. This is just the start. Human Scale is creating solutions for a net positive impact for our oceans.
So with that, I'll turn it open to Q&A.
Great, thank you, Jane. This is really fantastic. I always love seeing just those visuals that really bring it to life about the impact that you guys are having. Mikhail, are you able to join us as well on video so that we can kind of chat through some of the questions that have come through on the Q&A? Thank you. Yay,
I am
perfect.
back. I am answering a few of them in written form, but it doesn't mean we can't also discuss them. So
okay, perfect. I've been keeping an eye on it as well, so feel free to bring up anything key that you're excited to chat through, but I can at least kick us off. And for those of you on the webinar, again, just a reminder, feel free to continue to ask questions that come up or that you've thought of in that Q&A section. That's where we'll actually translate your question into the discussion. I wanted to start us off really fast, so just kind of with a quick question from my end. Both of you have touched on this a little bit, but I think it'd be interesting to talk through the audience here at NeoCon. There's many like interior designers, people who are looking at purchasing products. What do you think the key impetus is for, or like the real argument that these people should think of when they're thinking of designing a space for purchasing from companies that are working on innovative materials that are helping our environment, like ocean-bound plastic, and why it's important to pick the Smart Ocean Chair over another chair, and how they might think about incorporating that into a space or the story that they're trying to tell with the space that they're building.
great question. I think as as Jane alluded to, the first thing we have to do is make sure that if we have this cool story behind the product, that the product still does everything else you expect it to do. That's why we have to do all the testing. You can say, oh, well, this, fiber is made from fishing nets we kept out of the ocean, and you can only have it in, grayish green and black. No, you need to have a full color palette. Still needs to perform, still needs to be just as durable, all, just as beautiful, all the things you normally look for. And then you can say, we still need all the usual stuff, and we're going to prefer stuff that also has this additional positive impact. And that is our job as manufacturers, is to scale. And scaling means making it economical to do every day as much as possible. So that, I love telling the story where people are saying, oh, well, I love this story about networks. I spec interface on the job. Does it have that in there? It probably does, because there's a little bit of this material in all of our products on nylon 6, which is over 60% of what we sell. So it's not just a little niche thing. The actual amount of material from networks is small. The amount from fishing nets is quite large, just in the neighborhood of 25% of every aquafill yarn that we're selling. So it really is a scalable solution. Frankly, the biggest challenge with the networks program is when you tell people about it all over the world, they'll ask you why you're not working with their local fishermen, because just about every country in the world has, fishermen who are struggling to make ends meet and could really use some additional income from recycling their nets. So that is the challenge, and why the work of Next Wave is so important, is to give all of these communities that need net recycling, need additional income, access to a program like that.
Any thoughts, Jane?
Yeah, I guess it's interesting to think about when we think of the framing of the story of how this happens, and it really does take everyone along the way to make it happen. So I'm sitting here telling it from a human scale point of view, and Mikhail's telling it from an interface point of view. I mean, Borreo will tell it from a Borreo point of view, and the local fishing communities will tell it from their point of view. But if you're specifying the product and actually purchasing the product, you tell it from your point of view as well, because none of us can do our work all the way down to the fishing communities that are collecting back the material if the product is never sold. So if you are able to specify a product that has this kind of an impact, that means you are actually creating this kind of impact as well. So it's just something to think about, is that you're not it's not like a nice thing to say like, oh, human scale did that, that's nice that they did that. It's actually, if you're specifying the product and doing it intentionally, then you're part of creating this impact as well, because we do need the partners on both sides of the supply chain and the customer base. We do need to sell the product to make sure that all these benefits do happen.
Excellent, thank you. And real quick, could you actually stop sharing your screen so that we can get our videos a little bit bigger while we're chatting?
Sure, yeah, I was wondering about that, because I thought people wanted to see the contact info, but let me do that.
And just as we're doing that, perfect, thanks. Great, thanks, that's really helpful to hear. We've had a number of questions about the actual material that you guys both have cases of using nylon nets, but there's lots of other plastic out there, and that's at risk of getting into the ocean. From a Next Wave perspective, there are a number of our other companies are using materials like PET or high-density polyethylene or polypropylene in products that are out on the market. But I know that there's also opportunities across other products within Interface and Human Scale's menu of products and offerings that could potentially incorporate other materials. How do you think about evaluating what other materials and what other types of supply might come from ocean-bound plastic material, and how that fits into kind of your ethos and design approach?
Yeah, that's when, we had always thought of the Smart Ocean and the ability to incorporate the material into the injection molded components in Smart Ocean as a test run to just prove that it could be done, and really as a first step. So I don't at all mean to present this as like, now we solved the problem and we're done. Not at all. And so we do have a lot of work since Smart Ocean, and even before Smart Ocean launched, we had already started the testing of other products, and it just does take a fair amount of work and time to make sure that that happens. But yeah, we're evaluating a number of other products, a number of other materials, and it's getting those samples, it's running through the injection molding of those components, sending out the cycle testing. That can take months for cycle testing to happen, you know, once we have the material and they're molded and all that. So that's one thing. We've also been we partner very deeply with Boreal, so we do want to support them very closely. And one thing they do is they make sure that the material is pure nylons from nets, and that's one thing we've supported as well. So it has been kind of an interesting thing to keep that very closed off. When we want an injection molder to mold a sample, for example, we need to ask them to purge to stop molding anything else and really set the time aside. So it does add to the time for development, but definitely we have a lot of projects in the works that unfortunately I can't go into the details of, but we'll see them when they launch.
Yeah, I know we got a sample from a supply chain where they're keeping PET bottles out of the ocean in Southeast Asia from another Next Wave partner. Whatever the project they're developing using PET is so top secret that I don't even know what the product is. So, but I do know we are actively testing other materials. And as I pointed out in one of the comments, nylon is, and if you look at the principles of what makes a recycling system work, one of the things that makes the economics are key. You know, another person asked me questions about transport, and you do have to have efficient transport to not, you know, generate so many carbon emissions from transporting the materials around the world that you get rid of the advantage of you know, lowering your footprint by using recycled materials. The footprint of virgin nylon is so high that we can transport materials from the Central Philippines back to Europe over to the US, and it's still not nearly as high as making crude oil into, you know, virgin nylon fiber. So you have both in terms of the impact and the economics, because nylon is a comparatively expensive plastic, very high performance engineering plastic. You have some money and some carbon emissions to play with, and you can continue to make it more efficient, both environmentally and economically. But you start out with some room to play with. It's also one of the most damaging ocean plastics, and we're talking about fishing nets. So it's a great place to start, but you really are leveraging the fact that it's a comparatively expensive, high performance plastic to set up these supply chains. When you're dealing with the commodity plastics like you'd find in a milk jug or packaging or something, it's a less valuable plastic. And if you can't develop a supply chain that's price competitive with the relatively cheap plastics, it's going to be more challenging to scale that up. So nylon is a great place to start. It's far from the only plastic we need to keep out of the ocean. But in terms of being the most damaging and being the most expensive, there's a reason we're both in that, and that several of the other Next Wave companies are. But there's a lot of other Next Wave companies working in other plastics. It's not the only plastic we're working to keep out of the ocean.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks for really driving that home. I think that the nets component is really valuable because of what you said, but there's also a lot of other plastic that is, especially with the post-consumer things that are being collected and used in other Next Wave products and examples. I think that one of the things you touched on about transport and the carbon impact is really interesting. And that's part of the reason that at Next Wave we're trying to create and are creating this global network of ocean-bound plastic suppliers, is that, you know, we're looking for having supply in many different places. I mean, we have some great examples here where there's, even just between the two of you, you have supply coming from Southeast Asia, Africa, South America. And so that global perspective also allows for companies whose manufacturing and production is primarily happening in Asia to be sourcing ocean-bound plastic from Southeast Asia, and similarly doing the same thing on the North American side, often sourcing ocean-bound plastic from Central South America and the Caribbean. So that's really part of the ethos of how we think about things, and why we're trying to take this perspective of fostering markets for ocean-bound plastic from a global perspective. The one thing that might be interesting to hear from you, Jane, there was a question about, well, actually from both of you. So there's a question about that next wave companies are doing a great job using recycled plastic, but what are they doing to keep recycled product out of landfills and possibly the ocean? I know both of your companies have programs either in terms of a policy approach or other issues around your approach to plastics in general. Can you speak to that?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we'll have different programs for sure. Our products tend to be relatively complex products with a lot of different materials used in them, which has a challenge for recycling. The other thing that I found, and we did a project where we launched a chair, which was a relatively simple chair. We actually molded into the bottom of it a phone number to phone. If you're going to dispose of this chair, phone this phone number. That was over 10 years ago, and I think we've gotten one phone call. Like, it really is interesting to see the difference between the thought process at the beginning and how you would think things work in theory, and then how they work in practice. So we do find when an office is going to be renovated, it is very unlikely that we see anybody taking the time to reach out to manufacturers and deal with each individual product the way they do when they're taking the time to specify everything to put it in the office in the first place. We find it's usually very, very common that people will say, get a waste hauler to come and take everything away, or they'll take the majority of things away. So we have found it really hard to get product back, and it's been kind of slowly become my perspective that it's a losing, or sort of swimming upstream, or a losing battle to try and get our individual product back. And instead, what we've decided to do is try to influence how that transition happens in a larger way. So if someone is going to renovate, let's look at what they're doing with all their material, not just their human scale chairs, including their human scale chairs, but let's look at it as a larger holistic project, and let's try and help our clients through that project in a more responsible way. So we do have a program, and I mentioned this because if anyone is thinking of renovating, or is an architect and their clients are renovating, I mean, please do reach out, because that is something we actively try to do, is help our clients through that interaction. I think that because we have a complex product and it's not the majority of the space, it is a little different for our product. So you can reach out to betterworld@humanscale.com. I'll just repeat that, betterworld@humanscale.com, and we will do our best to help you through that process and to deal with the waste as responsibly as possible. We have a relatively complex program to deal with the different municipalities, different locations, and I'm not going to go into the details. I do think it might be quite different for carpet, because it's possible people do reach out for carpet more than they do for furniture. So Mikhail, you let me know about that.
Yeah, they definitely do. Not as much as we would like. I just put answer the question in the comments, but this is, and we have very much driven it much more of a thing in carpet, because it is very much a semi-durable product. It's a product that's warranted to last 15 years, and in the average office lasts 5 to 7 in terms of, we're time for a refresh, a new color scheme, whatever. It's not worn out, but it is often replaced at the 5 to 7 year mark. So it can be in the office a lot, shorter period than furniture, for instance. So we actually have a whole recycling program. If you look at our products, a lot of the materials in it come not even on the Aquafil fiber side. The other thing we've worked very closely with Aquafil on is getting carpet fiber back into the carpet fiber. So we've, for instance, lobbied in California with Aquafil and against most of the rest of the carpet industry to support a legislative approach to carpet recycling. And so right now you have a situation, and it's gotten even worse, with the current disruption, where California is recycling about 20% of post-consumer carpet, and every other state is about the 1% level. Now, if you are in the Illinois area, which a lot of NeoCon goers are, please support the legislation we've helped introduce in Illinois to actually create a viable carpet recycling market in Illinois. Again, most of the carpet mills are not in favor of that, because it amounts to a tax to support recycling on the sale of carpet in your state. But this is what it takes to actually make the circular economy work, is to make the economics work. Circular economy is a wonderful idea, and until you make the economics work, it doesn't do all these wonderful things it could do, keeping stuff out of landfills, dramatically reducing the climate change impact of the products we buy. Until we actually have these materials being reused in new products and have that economics work, even competing against cheap oil and gas, we're not going to have the circular economy and all the wonderful benefits of it. So for us, yeah, it's much further along into the point where we actually have, recycling legislation like you have for e-waste and some other commodities. And we really need to spread that state by state.
Yay, thank you. I think that's a really great place and a great message for us to end on, just in terms of making the economics work for this to really be something that grows, not just for ocean-bound plastics, but for circular economy in general. There are a ton more questions that I wish that we could answer and work through and talk about, but I really thank you guys for joining me here today, and hope that everyone enjoyed the panel. Thanks so much. We're at the hour, so we have to sign off, but thanks so much for joining us.
Please do reach out to us with additional questions. Hopefully you have our contact information that we put up.
I'll put that back up, actually, if you're interested in contact information for reaching out directly.
Great.
Thank you, Jane.
Kendall, Mikhail, and Jane, thank you so much. That was a great presentation, and it was so insightful and informative. We really appreciate it. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Please join us next week as NeoConnect webinar series continues on Monday. Have a great weekend and be well.
Okay, thank you. You too.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.